This is obviously a group or groups, well-financed and extraordinarily well-organized.
That's correct. Now, another thing you'll notice is that you remember the attack on the USS Cole in the Yemen harbor. That was the first time that kind of an attack using small boats with bombs in them had been used against an American warship. It worked once. Now the U.S. Navy has taken steps to make that much more difficult to do. Officials saying this may work once. They will now have to take measures to try to make sure that this kind of thing can't be done again. But these are apparently hijackings of civilian aircraft. So it was a sort of modus operandi that was dreamed up in some evil terrorist's mind and done on a massive scale here today, Aaron.
David, thank you. CNN's David Ensor, our national security correspondent, on what he is hearing, what he knows, what the reports are as we approach 11:20 Eastern Time. For those of you just joining us, and as you can see on your screen, the Taliban, the government in Afghanistan, expected to make a statement soon, and we'll monitor that for you. For those of you just joining us, let me try and put as many of these pieces together as I can as we stand here in New York. At about 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time this morning, the first of the Trade Center towers was hit by a plane. It crashed into the south side of the tower. About a half an hour later, a second plane came from the right, and you can see it coming behind the first tower, and then it hits the tower, and you'll see the flame and smoke coming out, I guess 3/4, maybe a little more, up the tower. That's where this all began. About a half an hour after that, the first of that tower that is now you see in flame there in your shot collapsed. The top collapsed. And there was an enormous, I don't want to say explosion, but there was an enormous plume of smoke, sparks, as we looked over from where we're standing. And then a little bit after that, and I want to be careful on time because it seemed perhaps 10 or so minutes, but I'm not sure. The second tower, which in fact was the first one hit, collapsed as well, and that's what you're about to see. Our reporters in the area say they heard loud noises when that happened. It is unclear to them and to us whether those were explosions going on in the building or if that was simply the sound of the collapse of the buildings as they collapsed, making these huge noises as they came down. But as we look back, the smoke now, which has gone from white to a kind of gray, clearing away, we are, I guess, Jeff, I want to know what's behind the smoke, but I have the worst feeling is that very little.
And the fact is that we've already been hearing from even the fragmentary reports from people on the ground, stories beyond horror, people jumping out of windows because of the flames. The fact that this happened shortly before 9 and then the second hit shortly after 9 means that most of the people were either right in the vicinity or actually at their desks. So one doesn't want to be overly grim, but the fact is there were thousands of people were in these two buildings.
And again, 50,000 people come to work in those buildings. Many thousands more pass through those buildings every day. There are retail shops on the lower floors of the Trade Center.
It is where the PATH trains from New Jersey come in.
Correct. The trains, the commuter trains coming from the other side of the river from New Jersey come in and drop off and pick up their passengers. So it is an extraordinarily busy area. It is also an area, for a number of reasons, rich in symbolism to this city and to the country. You can see from where we are the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor in the scene. So that's what happened in New York. At about the same time, and again, I don't want to put times on much of this yet, after one of these hijacked planes hit the Trade Center in New York, events started to unfold in Washington. A plane hit the Pentagon. And then there was a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has now been evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. The president, who was in Florida, went before cameras to denounce, as you would expect, and as we would expect, this terrorist attack, promising to hunt down those responsible. It was the president himself who first used, at least as I heard the story unfold today, the word terrorism. There was no doubt in his mind, at least. The president now is heading back. We are now getting a report from that American Airlines says that one of its flights, a flight from Boston to, I believe, Los Angeles, correct me guys if I'm wrong, is down, or at least they've lost contact with it. 81 people on board. This would be the second of American Airlines flights to have been involved, presumably, in this event. Another flight, this one from Dulles to Los Angeles, is down with 54 passengers on board. So again, so there are two American Airlines, one Dulles, Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, the other Boston to Los Angeles. Both American Airlines planes reported by the airline to be down. It is also believed that an American Airlines plane, a 767, was involved in one of the hits on the Trade Center as well. We don't know if there's a reason why it is American and not any other. We won't speculate as to whether there is or not. We'll just tell you what the facts are as we get them, and that's what we have. American says two of its planes down, and I assume that is two other than the one that hit the Trade Center, and you guys check that out to make sure I'm right.
And we have a report of a crash in Somerset County outside of Pittsburgh.
Right, I believe a 767, though we're getting reports perhaps a 747, which doesn't quite fit into what we believe flies Chicago to New York, is also down as well. And I do not know the airline involved there. Let me just go back okay, I do now. It's a United Airlines plane. So we have a number of planes down, a number of planes involved in these attacks. The Boston to Atlanta, if I'm reading the notes correctly, had an American 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots.
Flight 11.
Reported down. That's American Airlines Flight 11. And American Airlines Flight 77, which is a 757 jetliner, Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Los Angeles International, with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots, also reported down. And then there is this United Airlines jet, which crashed about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh.
We should also mention, I think, Aaron, that inevitably some of these early fragmentary reports are going to be needing correction, and that will be done as soon as possible. We had a report of a second hijacked plane on the way to Washington. Capitol Police were reporting that there have been no signs of that plane. We simply, at this point in this awful story, have to just tell our viewers we will do everything we can to report this accurately. If fragmentary reports need amending or correcting, that will be done immediately.
And I think in fairness here, there is in a number of places right now, perhaps 4 or 5, chaos. And numbers that come out aren't necessarily going to hold up. And in our reporting, we will be a bit conservative on some of this until we track it down. There's no point in allowing this thing to seem worse than it is. It is already horrendous, and we don't need to make it any worse by misstating numbers, and we want you to keep that in mind. CNN Medical Unit reports that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, is preparing bioterrorism teams to respond to the incidents. This, we are told, is simply precautionary. We have absolutely no reports and no evidence that there is any biochemical or bioterrorism going on, but clearly what is happening in every department of the United States government, and I suspect in every department of most major cities right now, the plan that they hope they never have to implement, the plan that they spent years preparing, is now in effect, not just here, not just in Washington, but around the country, because no one knows precisely where this is going. CNN, my colleague Judy Woodruff joins us from Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we've been watching this here in the Washington Bureau. I'm in the studio now just a few blocks from the Capitol, from the United States Capitol, and the first thing I want to tell you is that everyone I'm sure on their minds is God rest the souls of those who've lost their lives this morning in New York, in Washington, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. It is just a story for which there are no words to describe. Here in Washington, we are keeping a very close watch on the Pentagon. You've been reporting, Aaron, and other CNN correspondents. A plane evidently crashed, a commercial jetliner crashed into the Pentagon earlier this morning. Approximately 60-foot section of this building, which is, of course, the headquarters of all the military for the United States, was on fire as a result of this crash, and then collapsed. These are some of the pictures we've been bringing our audience from the Pentagon. We've watched people being treated by first aid personnel there. We have no information yet on casualties, on the number of people who may have been hurt or may have died in this incident, although emergency personnel on the scene have said surely there have been casualties there. Elsewhere in Washington, every federal building has been evacuated or is in the process of being evacuated. I'm now told that United Airlines is now saying that can you tell me the number of the flight? 93 has crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. Now, we don't know if this is the same airplane that Aaron was reporting a little earlier crashed in Somerset County near Pittsburgh. Aaron had reported that some minutes ago, and now we are getting a confirmation from United Airlines that its flight, United 93, on the way to San Francisco, has crashed. So we now have at least two commercial airline companies in the United States. American Airlines reporting two of its passenger jets down, one flight Dulles in Washington to Los Angeles, and then another flight from Boston to Los Angeles down, and now we have United Airlines reporting at least one airline or airliner down with concern about another one. So the pieces of this story continue to come together. I have to say, in my 30 years as a journalist, I have never seen anything like this, never covered a story of the dimensions of this, and I'm sure it's safe to say that's the case for my colleague Aaron Brown and for any one of the other many correspondents, producers, and others with CNN and our colleagues at the other news networks. And I would just remind you that CNN right now has producers, correspondents all around the world who are watching for any more information that we can bring you at this point. As Aaron and Jeff Greenfield have been saying in the last few minutes, everything we have right now is fragmentary. We are simply reporting to you what we are learning from police, from the federal government, from the CIA, from David Ensor, from our other correspondents. And I'm now told that former U.S. Army Commander General Wesley Clark is joining us on the telephone. Former commander of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General Clark, from your knowledge of the military, you know the Pentagon. What are you thinking right now?
Well, good morning, Judy. First of all, we've got to try to assess what's really happening, and as all of the news reports indicate, it's clearly a coordinated effort. It wasn't announced, and it hasn't been announced that it's over, and we don't know how it will finally conclude, so there's likely to be more trouble before all of this concludes. So we've got to protect the American people first. We've got to look after those who are injured. We've got to take precautionary measures to deal with future incidents, and I think all of that's underway with a lot of responsible action by people everywhere. The damage at the Pentagon is unclear from all the news reports that I've seen, The one report that said it crashed into the Army side of the building. There are command centers in various places of the Pentagon, and there are many other alternate command centers. So I don't think there's really any issue about the command and control of the United States Armed Forces. I'm sure that's very solid right now.
General Clark, why do you say there's